Thank you very much, Eric. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to share with you some of the experience of applying the gains model. Previous presentation mentioned already that, so this is should make my job easier. And I will try in this presentation to, the title maybe is a little bit bold about using various co-benefits tools in Asia, because I will focus on specifically on the gains model application that was mentioned already in the previous presentation. It's a tool for systematic assessment of cost effectiveness, and this is an important element where we are looking search for least cost solutions, considering both air quality and greenhouse gases targets or constraints. We can define that in the model, what kind of targets will be defined. The model is building actually emission inventory. I will come back to that in a second. And it relies on external projections of activities. So we closely work with teams that develop actually futures in terms of drivers, meaning macroeconomic projections and projections of energy use or agriculture use that we embed then in the model and calculate emissions and propagate that to estimate health implications and look into how we could reduce impacts of air pollution, as well as greenhouse gases. Gains, in the meantime, has a global coverage, and for different purposes, it uses different actually underlying atmospheric models also. There are several model implementations that are implemented at the regional level or continental level, like Europe, Asia, or dividing even South Asia and East Asia, if you wish, and then, of course, country and province level. Very quick run through principal ideas of the model. This is nothing new to most of you. It's just to illustrate in a way, an order that we are looking at the issues. And emission inventories were mentioned just a second ago. So the various activities that driving emissions, we are adding a component of control technology explicitly in the model. So when you build emission inventory in the gains model, you specifically define policies through application of measures. For example, different Euro standard of vehicles or application of end of pipe measures like flue gas desulfurization or dust removal technologies on stacks or better stoves. So you can define different types of technologies. This allows you to calculate emissions. For each of these technologies, emission factors are predefined, but you can define them also yourself from studies that you are doing in a region, for example. And there's also costs defined for each of these technologies, allowing for this emission inventory as well as projection then in the future to calculate evolution of emissions and also change in costs associated with application of different technology. So it's not a system cost, but it's a cost associated with air pollution control or also climate mitigation. And we are working closely with the modeling community and have a set of source-receptor coefficients that allows us to quickly calculate concentration of PM2.5 and exposure that then can be translated or is translated in the model into health impacts. Most of the time PM2.5, but for some regions also ozone, and there's also environmental impacts. From the policy end, you can define targets. Where do you want to go? You could do it in a simulation mode. So you could define a target of concentration of PM2.5, for example, and design different scenarios with different control technologies and repeat that process through scenarios and compare it to the target and see how far away you are from a target, or employ a cost optimization that actually is not part of the online model. The link is provided here. This is a free tool. And this should be done with us. It requires some additional information also, but it allows them to design mitigation strategies that will actually outline how to achieve particular targets in a cost optimal way. And this is, I will give few examples quickly for few of the countries. An important part of the development of the model or application specifically to a particular region is that we try to collaborate with people working in the region, with experts working in the region. However, we define a starting point. So based on international data sets and our own experience, we define data that are used, like activity data based, for example, on IEA, International Energy Agency projections, or FAO projections, downscaled already to regional level. We have peer-reviewed emission factor data sets are used in the model. And also we are making interpretation of emission control policies. Now, a very important part of that calibration, basically, of the approach to the local country or even local situation is working with national experts and refining all of that information with national data where available. I promised to mention the cost benefit or cost effectiveness issue, because often this is a bit mixed up. What we mean by cost effectiveness analysis, it's often mixed up a bit with cost benefit analysis. So looking at the calculation of emissions and implications on concentration and then health impacts, as well as value of this health impacts, we look into this from the perspective of cost effectiveness analysis. So we make a policy choice in terms of concentration, for example, to achieve a particular air quality limit value or achieve a certain reduction of impacts, like 50% reduction of impacts, and look for a solution that allows us to specify which measures, which policies would deliver this target, achieving a quality limit value or reducing impacts by 50% at least cost. This is what GAINS is trying to do, while some of the other models that were also mentioned, like BenMap, typically would look also into the cost benefit analysis and would make a choice about, say, a value of life, but the same would apply to ecosystem costs. And that will be used to look into the measures that actually the monetized benefits are larger than the costs. So this is for the explanation, and let me run through a few examples. I'll bring first an example that maybe some of you came across. That was a major study that involved actually experts from all of Asia. The air pollution in Asia and the Pacific, science-based solution, published by UNEP and CCAC in 2018. And this is just one slide to summarize what type of group of measures and what improvements were calculated and how Cobenefits worked in there. The starting point for that analysis was that if we look into population weighted exposure across all Asia, the current policies would not allow to reduce that level compared to 2015 by 2030. And even more so, it's very important to implement current legislation. These are current policies that would bring reduction of air pollution. Here it's black carbon that is sort of showing the air pollution impacts of current policies, that is reduction of these emissions. At the same time, economic growth is driving CO2 emissions and methane emissions. Implementation of this policy would bring reductions, but doesn't move us actually and doesn't improve the situation from 2015. Further sets of measures, which we refer to as conventional controls. What we mean here is application of currently existing technologies applied already in many countries, for example, in transportation, in power sector, sort of classical air pollution technologies that bring no benefits directly to CO2 or methane. They would achieve important improvement in exposure, reduction of exposure to PM2.5, but not enough to bring us down to this WHO guideline referred to here is the old one, 2005. In September 21, WHO announced a new one, which is looking into 5 micrograms, so very, very ambitious. At that time, we compared that to WHO 10 micrograms, which is also very ambitious. And next stage of measures, could think about agriculture, for example. You see a co-benefit in methane mitigation. You would introduce measures that would bring air pollution reduction through ammonia mitigation. But not only that, also, for example, measures like banning burning of residues on the field. And then additional step would be to employ measures that cut across also climate policies and reach towards energy efficiency improvements and increasing renewables, cooking, moving to clean fuels. That has co-benefits across all of the species, both greenhouse gases and air pollutants, and bring down the concentration significantly towards the WHO guideline. So this is something that I recommend anyone to look at and read. That was a huge effort. Now, another example is something that is not yet published, and it's a joint work between IGES, SEI, and Climate Clean Air Coalition has supported that study, and the ASA. The situation in the ASEAN region is that according to the calculation driven by the World Energy Outlook projections, in this case showing the change in PM2.5, shows that in the region, you see most of the populated areas, urbanized areas, would face, with current policies, would face increase, this is all yellow and red, would face increases in concentration of PM2.5 and exposure in spite of existing policies. What it means in terms of exposure, we on this slide, you see a change from 2015, where pretty much 70% of population lives in areas above the WHO guideline of 10 micrograms. If we put the new guideline of 5 micrograms, that would be about 85% would be actually living in areas above that long-term guideline. And even the 35 micrograms, which is, there's about 100 million people here living in areas where this target 1 is not met. This target 1 is highlighted here because it coincides in many countries, not all, with national standards. So there's a significant part of population that actually is exposed to levels beyond national standard. And this is increasing in the current legislation. So there's more people actually exposed to higher concentration. Implementation of all measures that were calculated, designed with the Gaines model, priority measures, would change that drastically, because national standard would be achieved nearly everywhere, and the population that is exposed to levels consistent with WHO guidelines of 10 micrograms would more than double, from 200 to about 500 million. There's a lot of different measures were looked at. We aggregated this into 15 categories of measures, and you see here they are grouped into different classical, in a way, groups of clean cooking, power and industry, like putting filters on top of large industrial plants, transportation measures, agriculture, that plays an important role. In terms of colors, what I want to highlight here, and this is also highlighted here in this bullet, the dark colors indicate existing legislation that is already committed, implemented legislation, and that's recently announced after 2015 legislation. It's very important to monitor that. It was mentioned already in previous presentation how important institutions are in enforcement, and we confirmed that in this analysis that about 40 to 60, 20 to 60%, about 40% overall is committed on paper at least. So it's important to do that, but there is further significant potential that is shown here on many of these measures that cut across both typical air quality measures, like household cooking or power sector, but also agriculture, for example, that will have also strong benefits for methane mitigation. And one thing I would like to highlight here is there's a lot of discussion about electric vehicles and potential for improvement of air quality. On the bottom, you see here, this is population weighted across all region, PM2.5 improvement. So there's few micrograms that could be gained by something that I classified here as not a trade-off, but it's a conscious choice that can be made. This mitigation can be achieved, this reduction can be achieved by implementation of very strict standards, quick implementation of, say, Euro 6 standards on vehicles, or alternatively, focus on switching to electric vehicles. That would be, in a way, a similar potential that could be achieved in a longer term. At a country level, that's a very busy slide, but I just wanted to show you that at the level of single countries within the ASEAN region, you see the improvements are significant considering all of these policies, again, sliced into already existing population, the legislation, dark colors, and the further potential that is somehow different from country to country, but all of them point in the same direction without doing more than currently committed. There is no improvement. In all of these countries, we estimate that air pollution will get worse at a larger scale. Of course, it doesn't mean it gets worse everywhere, but there's at the country level, it's getting worse, and therefore implementation of these measures is very important. One aspect of co-benefits I want to highlight is the local versus transboundary sources. We are not going to go through these measures in here because I'm running out of time, but the two colors indicate here for these two countries implication of own measures. This is the dark color, own policies, and the lighter yellow shows here benefits of what the neighbors are doing. And this is highlighting the fact that collaboration is an important aspect of this co-benefits. This also allows for exchange of technology, learning from each other, and it will translate into then health co-benefits. The other co-benefit is, of course, these emissions have been highlighted also in previous presentation on, in this case, short-lived climate pollutants. The air quality policies will translate into strong mitigation of black carbon associated with PM2.5 emissions, but also methane. And straight from the air quality measures, there will be a small reduction of methane, but then exploring some of the measures that will address the climate co-benefit and look into methane, specifically methane mitigation in agriculture or some of the fossil fuel industry will bring further significant benefits. To close, I'm actually should finish now, but there's one more example I would like to give you, and will not show all the slides, but I think slides will be shared later, is we focused on in North Vietnam. We are trying to look into a fine scale megacity. So it's even going down below a country, but focusing on a region around Hanoi. This is Hanoi and there are neighboring regions in here. What is important in this study is that we are looking into source attribution. We look into concentration of PM2.5, and a lot of people are exposed to pollution exceeding national standard, which is somewhere here, 25 micrograms. The model is performing pretty well in terms of concentrations compared to the measurements. But the important thing here is that the local contribution from Hanoi only represents maybe 30%, the local pollution, to the concentration. A lot of that is coming from regional sources in Vietnam. And these are the ones around here, the whole region, because actually everything is included. These are different domains. And also some from transboundary sources, for example, including China. So we are trying to understand that there's different sectors and mitigation in different sectors. It's not all of it is done in Hanoi, but you have to look into joint work, again, across regions within Hanoi and with the neighbors. We looked into scenarios that plot different futures. So we implemented current policy scenario. This is only conceptual illustration that shows how the pollution would be growing. It might actually even decline, but for the sake of illustration, we are trying to illustrate here the potential, how it's changing when current policies are implemented, when the new policies recently announced would be implemented, bringing that down and then reducing somehow the scope of further mitigation. That's what we want to be to achieve the standard, national standard. And here, including NDCs and the climate policies, brings the baseline down, certainly an improvement, reduces somehow the scope, but still you need to push for more. And we try to look into each of these. What does it mean in terms of measures? I will close with extremely busy slides, but I will highlight here this policy. So this is something to read further. You see, this is the first case for the national, for this policy case, current policy case, and looking into worsening the situation, increasing concentration, You see also regional sources. This is local and this is regional, increasing strongly compared to current situation. And then a case where we achieve the national standard, run the model to optimize for mitigation, brings it down very strongly. So there's an increase in the baseline, and then it brings it down strongly, mitigating measures both locally. See, this bar is declining, but also all of these regional bars. So it runs for the whole region. In the other case, we're looking into NDC policy that doesn't get so red if you compare the previous one. It gets much nicer colors in here. However, it's still not below national standard, which is somewhere here. So there is a reduction, but it's not yet quite achieving it. There's additional measures that are needed. And here focus actually is much more on the local, because a lot of this NDC policies addresses power sector, that is this blue, and this is bringing down coal emissions. And therefore the pressure is actually increasing in this kind of scenario on local sources. This concludes my presentation. I just wanted to highlight that the cost-effective air quality management at actually any level, regional, country level, requires an integrated approach involving multiple domains. In this analysis requires actually a careful look at both climate and air quality measures. And there's a lot of no regret policy measures that would address both the air quality and climate, and they need to explode. GAINS allows for a consistent analysis of both of them and assesses further mitigation potential at different levels, including cost effectiveness analysis. And collaboration with local partners is absolutely essential to develop credible data set. Thank you very much. Apologies for dragging 5 minutes too long.